Chapter 32 of Alicorns, Part 1. Warm water flowed around Anatomi's hooves, coaxing her awake. She blinked her eyes open, lifting her chin out of the wet sand. She was lying on her belly on a quiet beach, water smooth as glass stretching out before her. There were stars, a twinkling reflection of the night sky so pristine, it felt like she could pluck one out of the water with her hooves. Or perhaps she could dive in and join them, becoming a new constellation that young foals would look up at in wonder instead of fear. They framed a full moon, radiant and larger than she had ever seen before, that illuminated the landscape with a pale blue glow. Mountains in the distance, soft and purple, their sides dotted by trees that swayed in a gentle, soothing wind. The chirps and croaks of crickets and frogs drifted over it all, forming a song that tickled at the back of Anna's mind like a distant memory she could not place. She did not know where she was. She didn't know how she had gotten here. Part of her felt that she should be concerned by the revelation, but the only emotion she could muster was contentment. Peace. She stood, the water splashing around her hooves as she turned around. A small island awaited her, decorated by winding patches of colorful glowing mushrooms and lotus flowers. Her hooves began moving of their own accord, guiding her on a weaving path up the island's gentle slope. A wall of willows surrounded the peak, their trunks and sweeping limbs separating it from the rest of the world. Anna's hooves rustled through the fresh grass as she stepped between them, emerging into a small clearing ringed by luminescent blue flowers. Princess Luna stood in the center, smiling at her. Anna froze, her reverie shattered. She was dreaming. There were no mountains in Equestria. There were no islands, or beaches, or seas smooth as glass. Some ponies said the princesses came to them in dreams and told them prophecies of the future. Others said it was impossible to dream of them. Anna had certainly never dreamed of them before, despite many nights spent imagining what they might look like in reality. The artistic renditions seen in statues and paintings and the stained glass windows of 100 halls of worship were as diverse as the ponies that made them. Who could say which were the most accurate? But Gava had seen a princess, and Anna had seen the moon rise in the middle of the day to blot out the sun. Deep in her soul, with more certainty than she had ever felt for anything, she knew this was not just a dream.
Thou art a long way from home, my little pony.
Her words were like the mirror-smooth waters surrounding the island, crystal clear, flowing like water, but firm, regal. Her voice carried truth in a way that immortals couldn't. Anna felt she should answer, but what could she possibly say? She wanted to fall to the floor and beg for forgiveness, for guidance, to pour her heart out with the foolish hope that the princess could provide answers to her every problem. But she didn't want to make a fool of herself in front of a goddess.
Are you real?
Stupid question. Of course she was real. She felt more real than anything Anna had ever seen. But there was still a part of her waiting to wake up and realize she had imagined it all.
Yes, I am real.
Princess Luna smiled wider, extending a hoof.
Thou art in turmoil.
Anna stepped closer. She reached out, touching the princess's hoof with her own. Her heart fluttered with a painful hope.
Can you
Her throat tightened, her voice going hoarse.
Help me? First, thou must help thyself.
The princess's smile twisted into a smirk. Playful, but kind.
Seek out thy siblings, Silver Glow. Return home. What?
Anna frowned, struggling to process the words.
I must go for now.
Princess Luna's smile faded grimly.
But we shall speak again. Thou art not alone.
Anna's eyes flinched open. She lay on a rooftop in Harvest. There was no beach, no island, no distant mountains, and no starry sky. There was no Princess Luna. The serenity faded away, replaced by nagging doubt. She shot to her hooves, looking up, dreading what she might see. There was a black disk where the sun should be, ringed with fire. The moon, eclipsing the sun in the middle of the day. She coughed up a shaky laugh. Tears streamed down her cheeks as her whole body shook with rapture. She had prayed, and Princess Luna had answered. She heard ponies panicking in the streets below. Some of them screamed, no doubt taking the eclipse for some terrifying omen. The entire city was seized by a cacophonous buzz as the impossible blazed in the sky above them. But one sound in particular cut through the rest. A shrill, high-pitched keening that made Anna's ears twist and flick instinctively. No normal pony could make that noise. They couldn't even hear it. But Anna heard it. She snapped her head toward it, scanning for the source.
Seek out thy siblings.
Anna broke into a breathless sprint. Princess Luna opened her eyes. They didn't snap open with shock, nor did they wearily blink open as if rousing from a deep slumber. After centuries of continuous dreaming, Princess Luna woke casually as if from a midday nap, rolling to her hooves and straightening to her full height in a single fluid motion. Twilight watched breathlessly as Luna turned her head, her gaze passing over the cracked crystal floors. The golden sunlight bleeding at all angles from the jagged wounds carved into the architecture, and the unnatural darkness clinging to every surface. There was a subtle shift in Luna's stature. Her wings hovered at her sides, her hooves spread, her eyes narrowed, and her horn angled down ever so slightly, with only the slight ruffle of her long feathers to mark the transition.
What is this place?
Princess!
Twilight stepped into Luna's line of sight with a tentative smile. She opened her mouth, but was interrupted before she could find the words.
Welcome to our Crystal Empire, Moon Princess.
Shaper rumbled.
Much has changed since last you set hoof here.
Sombra! Luna's horn flared bright silver, her powerful magic aura shattering Twilight's shield dome into 1,000 spinning shards. The inky darkness filling the room rushed hungrily towards them, only to be beat back by the brilliant, pulsing light radiating from Luna's horn.
Thy clawing corruption seeps from the crystal itself. Thou art a fool to rouse me here. I shall relish thy cries for mercy.
Is this how an equestrian princess shows gratitude to her savior?
The shadows lengthened, the walls appearing to bow towards the stallion trapped in crystal as his red eyes smoldered. Twilight's ear twitched at the sound of crystal scraping against crystal, and she glanced behind her to see Shaper's thralls lurching back into the room, their beady gemstone eyes glinting in the light of Luna's horn.
We are not Sombra. We are Shaper, and we have sated ourselves with the nectar of your blackened soul, Moon Princess. Face us now, then, so we can take your body as our thrall.
Twilight grimaced, looking between the two powerful beings squaring off right in front of her. Exhaustion clawed at her, but she forced it down. She stepped to Luna's side, turning to face the thralls steadily surrounding them and straining to draw on her magic.
Twilight,
Midnight cautioned.
we need to get the princess to safety. She'll be safe once we get rid of Shaper and his thralls.
Twilight countered. She glared at the misshapen husks circling around them, daring them to come closer.
I'm ready, princess. Thou must take heed, Twilight Sparkle,
Princess Luna said.
This fiend's corruption carrieth an evil thou canst not imagine. Everything it touches.
She cut off with a quiet gasp. Startled, Twilight looked back and saw Luna staring at her with a wide-eyed, uncertain expression.
What fate hath befallen thee?
The princess asked.
Corruption clingeth to thee like the progeny of Sombra himself. Thy body is twisted and unnatural, yet thou actest freely? Is this some trick?
Her head snapped back toward Shaper, her voice lowering into a menacing growl.
Villain! Thou hast mangled her soul beyond salvation!
Twilight flinched, shrinking back from the grief in Luna's voice. For a brief moment, shame swelled inside her, but she cast it aside, trying to step into Luna's view again.
I'm still me, princess!
Your little pony speaks truth, Princess Luna.
Shaper's voice echoed from every direction as the crystal ponies completed their encirclement, shuffling to a stop with eerie precision.
She is a unique specimen. We would have happily studied and devoured her ourselves if she hadn't promised to deliver you to our chamber.
He let out a low, satisfied hum that sent a shiver down Twilight's spine.
She has helped us grow stronger in one day than we would in centuries.
And still it shall be not in the face of my fury,
Luna growled. Her eyes shone as the temperature plummeted. A layer of frost formed across every surface, coating the crystalline bodies of the surrounding thralls and sparkling in the light glowing from Luna's horn. Her majestic wings flared out with a powerful gust of wind, causing her starry mane to roil behind her.
Stay back, Twilight Sparkle. We shall talk after I have dealt with this monster. She doesn't trust me,
Twilight realized, half stumbling out of the way as the princess stalked toward Shaper. Her gut twisted in on itself, hot blood tears welling in her eyes.
She thinks I'm weak. You're not weak,
Midnight said, leaning against Twilight's side.
And you know she doesn't think that way.
Twilight cringed away from the touch.
I can prove myself. If I help her defeat Shaper, then she'll see. Why do we need to fight him?
Midnight pleaded.
There are more important things than squabbling with a petty king. No! Shaper is still a threat.
Twilight's lip curled into his snarl as she turned to face the crystal ponies and lowered her horn. She could still feel the bone-deep weariness from the fight with Luna's weird, which combined with Shaper's oppressive aura, made every attempt to channel magic feel like knives stabbing into her skull. But rather than shy away from the pain, she embraced it. She used it to block out her doubts and the nausea still lingering after Princess Luna's reaction to her appearance. And with clenched teeth, she created a long spike of red lavender magic, spinning in the air beside her.
We can win this fight. Twilight, stop! You're hurting yourself! You hurt yourself all the time when we needed a fight! And you stopped me!
Midnight reached over, grabbing Twilight's hoof. Instantly, the flow of magic cut off. Twilight realized her legs were shaking. She looked into Midnight's concerned eyes, struggling to keep the snarl on her face.
What do you expect us to do then? Hide under the princess's tail while she fights Shaper and his thralls?
The air began to reverberate as a droning hum filled the chamber. The thralls rocked slowly side to side with a single shared rhythm, their voices growing steadily louder as their crystal eyes grew brighter, the shadows sharper, the air thicker. Glancing back, Twilight saw Luna standing with hooves spread and her horn pointed at Shaper's crystal form like a spear, his eyes flickering like fire within his prison. The humming stopped. The pressure around Twilight's horn abated as every crystal pony, all at once, snapped their heads towards the ceiling. What? Shaper sounded confused, surprised, and then angry.
No!
Luna's eyes narrowed, but she didn't release her magic. Twilight looked around in confusion, taking an uncertain step towards Luna. Every crystal pony was focused on the same thing, somewhere far away and above.
You have brought invaders to our Crystal Empire, Equestrian!
Shaper roared. His thralls looked down, the chunks of crystal in their bodies grinding together as they leveled their dead stares on Twilight.
They are killing our ponies!
What invaders?
Twilight challenged, keeping her gaze focused on the surrounding thralls.
If I'd wanted your land, you would know it.
You dare accuse us of such perfidy? Here you stand in our sanctum, your princess restored by our own magics, and we awaken from the ritual to find your allies attacking our subjects in their flying ships!
What? My friends wouldn't do that. Unless they were in some kind of danger.
Midnight reasoned.
You're lying!
Twilight spat.
My friends are peaceful ponies.
Peaceful ponies slaughtering our servants without mercy!
Twilight was preparing a scathing retort when Princess Luna glanced back, cutting her off.
Twilight Sparkle, whatever the truth may be, it seems thy friends are in danger.
Twilight blinked. What was she doing arguing about the truth when her friends might be fighting for their lives at that very moment? She raised a hoof to her head, trying to clear her thoughts.
We need to go help them.
Luna nodded, stepping back and curling one wing around Twilight's shoulders.
Thy punishment is delayed for now, fiend, she said to Shaper. But I will not forget thee.
Her horn went out, the pale light of her magic vanishing with startling speed. The shadows rushed in, racing up Twilight's legs. For a moment, she could only see the firelight of the crystal pony's sightless eyes, and then she felt a sudden, indescribable shift. She felt warmth against her coat, and wind tugging at her mane. Twilight blinked in confusion. She was standing on top of the spire as Princess Luna's wing lifted off her shoulder. The stifling presence of Shaper's dark magic was gone, leaving a strange emptiness in its place. When she reached for her magic, it came easily, eagerly, the rush of power serving as an anchor she could clutch to. The thick curtains had been drawn closed and tied down with loops of cord. They fluttered and flapped along the edges, occasionally letting in a flurry of snow, which would quickly melt in the face of the burning braziers that wrapped at the spire's peak in a protective shell of heat. Several crystal ponies stood around the edges, their shoulders wrapped in thick furs, staring in shock at the two mares that had just appeared in their midst. At the center, seated around the black crystal marking the entrance to Shaper's domain, the crystal pony's elders looked up with expressions of mixed confusion, rapture, and suspicion.
Could it be?
Arctic Rose breathed, rising shakily to her hooves. A younger stallion rushed up, lending his support to the older mare as she stared at Princess Luna with unabashed reverence.
The Shaper has returned, in our time of need.
Steel yourself.
Smoke Quartz cautioned, seated opposite of her.
We cannot be certain this isn't some trick.
Chosen Twilight?
Ametrine asked uncertainly.
What did you see on your pilgrimage?
Luna looked to Twilight, who looked to Midnight.
What should we tell them? We came to help,
Midnight said. Twilight blinked, suddenly finding herself standing a step to the side, and Midnight in her former place.
Explain, quickly.
The elders hesitated, their gazes flicking towards their advisors watching from the periphery. Arctic Rose spoke first, her graying pink mane curling around her hooves as she threw herself down into a deep bow.
Oh, great savior and her chosen. Equestrians have come from beyond the ice to attack our home,
she said.
We have sent our warriors, but we fear it will not be enough.
Twilight's lips curled down into a firm frown. So it wasn't the crystal ponies who were attacking her friends. It was likely more bounty hunters that had somehow found them even this far north. And now the innocent crystal ponies, some of the kindest ponies she had met, were getting caught up in the violence. Well, if they wanted to make her an enemy, she would oblige.
Where are they? Outside, past the south face,
Ametrine said. She nodded to one of the watching advisors, who jumped to pull one of the 4 curtains aside. Through the haze of snow, Twilight saw 4 airships locked in battle. She immediately picked out the Argo, circling above an unfamiliar fortified ship with a long cannon barrel protruding from its prow. A short distance away, one of the crystal pony's strange black ships, the Flurry Heart, was drawn abreast to another open-decked airship. She saw several bodies littering the deck of the Flurry Heart, pools of blood gleaming in the sunlight. The crew of the open-decked ship were in the process of pushing off, using long poles to distance themselves from the Flurry Heart as the propeller spun up.
We're too late.
Anger swelled in Twilight's breast as she stepped closer to the ledge. Was she mad at the attackers for slaughtering innocents? Or mad at the crystal ponies for being so pitifully weak?
They already lost. No!
Ametrine cried, stepping up to Twilight's side with teary eyes. She sat back on her haunches, her hooves rising to muffle her sobs.
What have we done to deserve this?
Behind her, the other crystal ponies joined her in mourning. Princess Luna came to Twilight's other side, looking out over the frozen lake and snow-capped mountains before focusing on the airships floating above them.
How much time have I lost?
She asked.
Centuries.
Twilight muttered, glaring at the invading airships.
Maybe a millennium. And Equestria? Destroyed in all but name.
Twilight pursed her lips, thinking back on the shock of her first days in the future.
Selfish, violent ponies have taken charge. Magic and harmony are almost non-existent.
She clenched her jaw.
All of my friends are suffering.
Luna nodded. They watched as the open-decked ship began to accelerate, turning away from the drifting Flurry Heart.
What is happening here? More bounty hunters,
Twilight said confidently.
They never leave us alone. They followed us even here, beyond the edge of the map.
Luna's eyes narrowed. The wind quickened.
And the crystal ponies? They're strange, but kind,
Twilight said.
They eat meat and wear the skin of dead animals, but they welcomed us generously, invited us into their home, and now they're fighting and dying for us.
Her ears angled back, her voice lowering.
They don't deserve any of this.
A spark flared out from on top of the open-decked airship. It curved through the air towards the drifting crystal heart before disappearing into its hull. A flash of light silhouetted the crystal heart as it was blasted apart, the primitive netting and bridges built on top of it soaring through the sky in every direction. The hull cracked as secondary explosions detonated along its length, shattering the dark crystal like a giant glass toy. The thunderous report of the blast reached Twilight a second later, the deep rumbling soon joined by the sharp, shrill crack of heavy chunks of crystal smacking into the thick ice. The ponies atop the spire wailed in despair. Twilight's heart began to beat faster, her blood going hot in her veins.
We'll kill them.
She thought, nostrils flaring and horn lowering.
Rip them apart. Twilight, this isn't you.
Midnight stepped in front of her, standing in empty air with wide, concerned eyes.
This is me when my friends are in danger.
Twilight glared at Midnight.
What happened to the mare that pushed me to kill at every slight? I know what you're feeling.
Midnight drew closer, lifting a hoof to Twilight's chest.
This isn't healthy. Let me hold it again. No! I won't hide from my feelings anymore. If my noble sister had awoken to this Equestria, she would weep,
Luna said quietly.
It is good, then, that she is not here.
A tingle raced down Twilight's spine. She shuddered, looking up to see Luna's horn glowing a pale blue. The crystal ponies went quiet as well, their sobs cutting off with small, sudden gasps. The fires burning in the braziers dimmed, the shadows cast by their light growing hard and sharp.
Princess?
Twilight asked.
Without guidance, it seems ponykind hath fallen to the old ways,
Luna continued. She spread her wings, and in the distance, Twilight saw the shadows cast by the half-submerged mountains shifting.
I remember those ways. It is through my actions that they died, and I am well capable of killing them again.
A wall of shadow crested the eastern horizon, creeping between the valleys formed by the mountain peaks and racing across the ice. Twilight gasped, looking up, and watched as the moon slid neatly into place atop the sky, a stark black circle ringed with fire. The land was cast into a starless night, a darkness that subsumed the ground and sky. Only the lights of the 3 surviving airships stood out, and as the wind picked up and thick sheets of snow began to swirl around the spire, even they were barely visible.
I thank thee greatly for waking me, Twilight Sparkle,
Princess Luna said.
It seems I am eternally in thy debt.
She stepped off the ledge, disappearing into the darkness.
Princess!
Twilight ran after her, throwing herself off the edge and into the howling wind. She reached out with her arcane senses as she began to plummet, disappearing with the crackle of magic. As she took in the grisly scene before her, Rainbow realized she was holding her breath. 10 ponies, all armed. Probably trained, Rainbow assumed. Princess Luna had slaughtered them all in the span of seconds. Even with every one of them ready and waiting for her, she hadn't even broken a sweat, hesitated, or blinked. They'd been snuffed out like candles left outside in a chill midnight breeze. Maybe Rainbow could have done the same thing if she had the element of surprise and a fire in her breast. If she'd been able to get the drop on top of them before they knew she was there. But it would be a heart-pounding, adrenaline-fueled dance for her. She would be out of breath afterwards, bleeding from close calls and jittery with nerves. She knew she was awesome, but She couldn't even come close to Princess Luna's calm lethality.
Not yet,
Rainbow thought as she exhaled. The air reeked with the stench of fresh blood and fear.
but one day.
Star Trail stepped up on Rainbow's right, shivering as eddies of snow whirled through the huge tear in the hull and settled on the warm bodies.
She's back,
she whispered. She made a sound between a laugh and a sob, her next words filled with shaky relief.
We did the right thing.
Rainbow looked back. Sea Saber's hard red eyes went from body to body, her spread wings half folding, then flaring out again. The corner of her lips twitched up and down before setting into a thin line.
Hear that, Saber?
Rainbow pushed out with an exhausted grin.
I told you, didn't I?
Muted gunfire and screams echoed down the halls from the far side of the ship. Rainbow forced her grin wider as she thought of the bounty hunters getting what they deserved. Seems we're getting through this after all, eh? Flint said. He was standing behind Saber, looking down at her with an unreadable expression. Figure we ought to call Sunfeather, unless you wanted to spend the night. Sea Saber blinked. She shook her head, her wings folding neatly against her sides. Right. A crackling flash of lavender drew their attention. Rainbow whirled, a rush of joy swelling in her breast as she saw Twilight standing in the hall, framed by the dissipating sparkles of her magic. She looked like a madmare. Many of her various baubles and trinkets the crystal ponies had festooned her with before her descent were absent or broken, and she had deep bags under her slitted eyes. Her coat was matted with patchy splotches of blood. But Rainbow didn't care. She probably looked just as bad. She leapt forwards and tackled her friend, squeezing her tight.
You did it!
She cackled, shaking with relief.
I knew you would do it. You're amazing, Twi.
Twilight stiffened, awkwardly returning the hug.
I'm just glad we were able to get back in time to help.
She wriggled out of Rainbow's grip, taking a full step back before continuing.
What happened up here?
Silverblood, son.
Rainbow jumped up and struck a pose, hovering midair.
Thought he could do what his father couldn't, but nobody beats Rainbow Dash, especially not with Princess freaking Luna around to help.
The memory of a desperate mare driving a screwdriver into her lung reared up without warning. Rainbow faltered, drifting back down until her hooves touched the slickened meadow floor.
Seriously, though, It was looking pretty bad, Twi.
Twilight nodded. Her gaze drifted downwards. The cacophony of gunfire on the other side of the ship came to an abrupt stop. Seconds passed with only the whistling wind to fill the gap. Rainbow shifted her weight from one hoof to the other. Something felt off about Twilight. Rainbow's first instinct was to ask what was wrong, what had happened to her down there. What had she seen? She couldn't even begin to imagine what Twilight was going through. But Twilight had made it clear already that she didn't want to talk. At least not yet. And Rainbow knew she wasn't good at talking. It went against every instinct she had, but maybe it would be better to wait until they were somewhere safe. When they weren't soaked in blood with a blizzard tugging at their manes, surrounded by the stench of blood in a dark, corpse-strewn hall. Princess Luna was back, so surely they would have time to rest now. The princess would take one look around and know exactly what to do, and maybe then, with Applejack's help, Rainbow would have a better chance at helping Twilight. The choppy roar of the Argo's propellers drew Rainbow's attention. The familiar ship was pulling up next to them, fighting to keep steady as it swung its rear in their direction. There was a metallic clunk, and then a steady clicking as the cargo ramp swung down, revealing Applejack standing in the hold with a coil of thick rope beside her.
Howdy!
She called, barely audible over the wind. She planted one hoof on her head, pinning her hat in place, and tossed one end of the rope over with an expert flick of her tail.
Glad to see y'all still in the right number of pieces.
Flint caught the rope in his teeth, his neck muscles bulging as he pulled. The Argo drifted closer, the cargo ram bumping into the hoplite's hull with a metallic groan. Saber and Trails jumped the gap immediately. Rainbow looked back to Twilight.
You coming?
Twilight grimaced, looking backward into the ship's dark halls.
We should get back to Princess Luna.
I'm here. Princess Luna strode noiselessly out of the shadows, coming to a stop at Twilight's side. She dragged an unconscious body behind her, his quiet, pained groans proving him still alive. Rainbow frowned.
You let one live? Why?
As in all things,
an excess of bloodthirst is oft self-defeating, Rainbow Dash.
Luna smirked, her magic hefting the pony up by his neck.
This one may yet have uses.
He is no threat. Rainbow's frown turned to a snarl as she recognized Prince Argent.
This guy? Princess, he's the one in charge here! He's the one responsible for all this!
Thus, he is spared. For now. Luna shot him a sideways look, her mirthful expression turning cold. It is not a mercy. Flint cleared his throat, drawing their attention. He jerked his head questioningly, his teeth still clamped around the rope.
Let us not test thy companion's patience further, Rainbow Dash,
Luna said, already turning towards the Argo.
We shall discuss much, I am certain.
She leapt gracefully across the gap, her wings spreading barely an instant before she landed lightly in the Argo's cargo hold. Prince Argent floated beside her as she looked back, ignoring the way Startrails blatantly stared in awe. Twilight glanced to Rainbow before teleporting across, a few lavender sparkles left in her wake. Rainbow huffed, spreading her wings and gliding over the gap. Flint jumped across last, landing on the metal floor with a loud bang before spitting the rope out of his mouth. Why the hey did I hold that rope so long if none of you three even needed it? He grumbled. Applejack rolled her eyes and pulled the big lever on the cargo door's control panel. The heavy ram slowly ratcheted up, sealing the outside world away. More than anything, Twilight wanted to take a nap. She had been exhausted when she had woken at Luna's side in the middle of Shaper's sanctum. Waves of adrenaline had kept her going since then, but now she was safe. Her friends were safe. She saw Applejack and Rainbow Dash watching her as she dragged her hooves towards her little sectioned-off corner of the cargo hold. Princess Luna was looking around the ship with a keen eye. Startrails was still staring, and Sea Saber and Flintlock were quietly exchanging words off to one side. It would take hours to wade through the sea of questions every pony would have, including her own.
I need to sleep,
Twilight mumbled. She nosed through the curtain that served as her bedroom door and fell onto her cot face first. She silently willed her friends to leave her alone for just a little bit longer. She didn't even notice the moment of transition. There was maybe a minute where she was allowed to dream in peace, blissfully unaware. She was in the Golden Oaks library, reading an extremely interesting 8th edition of some textbook or other. It was sunny and birds were singing, and she had closed up the library for a holiday or renovations or some other off-the-cuff excuse.
Well?
Just like that, she was lucid. Twilight pursed her lips and looked up from her blank book, fixing Midnight with a challenging glare.
Sorry, but it's best if we don't put this off any longer.
She was stretched out lazily on top of a bookshelf, her own book cradled between her forelegs. She flicked it shut, revealing the title. Prudent Practices for Psychiatric Practice. Twilight was fairly certain that was not a real book.
I don't want to talk about it.
Twilight stood and pointedly turned away, walking into the kitchen. There was already a kettle on the stove. Midnight was sitting at the dining table, levitating a steaming cup of tea to her lips.
I know you don't want to talk about it.
Twilight narrowed her eyes, and Midnight answered with a warm smile. Twilight knew that Midnight would keep pestering her until she gave in, and Midnight knew that she knew. She might as well get it over with. Begrudgingly, Twilight sat opposite her other half, idly stirring her tea. She blinked, looking down at the steaming cup floating in her magic in surprise. She took a cautious sip, and was rewarded with a satisfying heat, the earthy flavor accented by a spoonful of honey.
What do you remember?
Twilight bit her lip as she lowered her mug. She remembered running after Luna, teleporting onto the bounty hunter's ship. It had been a massacre. Luna had walked through the ship and slaughtered all opposition, but Twilight had been focused on looking for Crystal Pony survivors. She had found them, but they had had guards. And then one of the guards pointed a gun at her. Pulled the trigger.
I remember the hatred.
It reminded her of the first time Midnight had taken over, when she had faced Philomena within the sinking ruins of Felis. She had only glimpses of that outburst, and it had terrified her so much she had refused to use her magic until her friends' lives had been endangered. But then she had become the danger. Midnight had taken over again and hurt Pinky in a way that Twilight would never be able to take back. Over time, she had almost become comfortable with it. When some monster had threatened them during their journey north, it had been easy for Twilight to let Midnight take care of it. Twilight did the talking, and Midnight did the fighting, the killing. And that way, they made a good team. Until just 6 minutes ago, when Twilight had turned 6 ponies into dismembered corpses. Midnight had only watched. There wasn't any need for Twilight to say it out loud. They had both been there, mostly. Twilight didn't remember every detail, but she remembered the sound of bones being pulled apart and the taste of blood splattering across her face. Above all else, she remembered the moment of realization when she had calmed down. She had murdered 6 ponies. She hadn't even hesitated.
Now, do you understand? Why I asked you to give it back?
Twilight looked up from her teacup, meeting Midnight's sympathetic gaze.
I don't want you to suffer anymore. I appreciate that, Twilight. And I appreciate what you've done. You know how much it means. But clinging to every negative emotion is just as destructive as pushing them all onto me.
Midnight reached out, touching Twilight's hoof.
Give them back. You've given me a glimpse of what it is to be happy. And that's enough. No, it's not fair.
Twilight shook her head, slapping her teacup away and shattering it against the floor.
I won't put you back into that place. I can take it. Of course you can.
Midnight leaned in.
But what might it cost us? What happens the next time you lose control? Or the time after that? What do we do when the only thing either of us can do is kill? I didn't lose control.
Twilight stood abruptly, glaring down at Midnight.
Those ponies needed to die. They attacked our friends. And Princess Luna would have killed them all anyways. I saved the crystal ponies they were holding captive just like I'd meant to.
Sleeping well? Twilight blinked, looking to the side. Princess Luna was sitting on her haunches next to the kettle, sipping her own cup of tea.
Princess Luna!
Twilight fell into a hasty bow, nearly smacking her head on the floor.
What are you doing here?
I have missed much, Princess Luna said, looking around the little kitchen. I had hoped when I cast myself into enchanted slumber that my sister would defeat the corruption and rouse me within a few years. She paused, closing her eyes. Yet it appears the corruption hath won. Ponykind is fractured. There is much to do. She opened her eyes, looking down at Twilight. I must know what happened. Rainbow Dash tells me thou art my best chance. Twilight straightened up uncertainly. How long had the princess been watching?
When did Rainbow tell you that?
She is still telling me, and with great enthusiasm. She hath also requested I look into thy... She paused, narrowing her eyes. Affliction.
She's not an affliction,
Twilight said tersely.
And what do you mean she's still telling you? Aren't you asleep?
Luna snickered, the corner of her lip pulling up into a teasing smirk. I am the Princess of Dreams, Twilight Sparkle. I need not sleep to dream. The expression vanished in an instant, replaced with an intent gaze. Tell me everything. Twilight looked to midnight, but she wasn't there. Even her teacup was gone.
Have fun, little flower.
Twilight grumbled. So much for getting some peace.